2022 NBA playoffs are now here, and after playing a season away from home, one that they are surely grateful to call a past memory, the Toronto Raptors, contrary to popular opinion prior to the start of the season, are once again playoff contenders.
That's going to do it. The Toronto Raptors will finish the season 27-45.
On and upward we go, Matty D. Better days ahead and looking forward to next season.
In some ways, this is a lost season. Right from the beginning, when all of a sudden you find out you have to go to Tampa. It was difficult from day one. No other team in the NBA faced what the Raptors faced. If you're going to lose a season, lose one where you're away from home and the fans aren't there to actually take part and see it.
Positionless basketball by choice is much better than positionless basketball because you have to play that kind of ball. So the Raptors are going to have to throw a Scotty Barnes in there, Pascal Siakam. This team was built to be able to move the basketball, move bodies, share the ball, and everybody gets an opportunity. They're going to be put to the test.
I thought we just had a couple stretches where things really didn't go our way, like abundantly in short stretches, and we kept fighting our way back in there.
We know where we are at our best and when everybody's healthy, and eventually we're going to be healthy again and beat the teams. And like I said, they counted us out the whole season, so this ain't nothing new for us.
I think it's wide open. The Miami Heat are still first. When everybody talks about the Sixers, everybody talks about the Nets and what the Nets are doing. You can't forget about the Bucks. So there's a lot of guys, a lot of teams that can win the title, can win the East and come out of it, but you just don't know. And then you have the young teams like the Raptors, who are really on the rise and are sneaking up and going to make some noise in the playoffs.
And what makes things even spicier is that the Raptors are facing off against the familiar foe in Joel Embiid and the 76ers. This time, however, in stark comparison to his team's previous superstar guard, Embiid now has the luxury of being paired with one of the greatest shooting guards in league history. And I'm sure this man doesn't really need an introduction. This series, however, isn't what it may seem on the surface if one were to take a deep dive into it.
When you think about last year, their rebounding last year and how poor it was, and what kind of a rebounding team they are this year, especially on the offensive glass, it's night and day.
It's 16 games in a row now where they got more shots than their opponent.
They are number 2 or 3 in the NBA in most field goals.
So how do you get more shots than your opponent? You got to win turnover margin. You got to pound the offensive glass. That's their attributes as a team.
Simply because the Raptors don't have a bona fide superstar or Hall of Fame talent on their roster, this does not justify the predictions that a number of basketball analysts, especially in the US, have been coming out with lately.
Toronto was swept. Rescinded, strike that from the table.
Now, given the fact that words like this have been uttered on US national television before,
I don't want a champion being in Canada again. The city of Toronto is great, but we know Canada loves its hockey.
You look at that, and it's no wonder why analysts don't often praise the Toronto Raptors nearly enough, especially when we're looking at US media coverage. When was the last time you saw a real nice long segment on the Toronto Raptors, heavily covered, extensively covered I should say, where there's no bias towards US teams? Even when the Toronto Raptors beat the Philadephia 76ers recently, where Pascal Siakam recorded a triple-double, with 37 points, 12 assists, and 11 rebounds I might add. When you look at the ESPN coverage, the only thing that they were talking about there was how the game was a failure for the Philadelphia 76ers. And isn't media reporting supposed to be an unbiased thing? I don't know, I'm just saying. And when you look at all this, it's no wonder why analysts don't often praise the Toronto Raptors nearly enough, and let alone favor them to win this series. And I'm not bashing all US media analysts here, a lot of them are great basketball minds, and there are some that really do respect the Raptors. But I think it's the producers and the shows themselves that really don't allow that spotlight to be shown on the Raptors. And as Stephen A mentioned in that last clip, I think he speaks for most of America there, or most of American media rather. By the way, I did just notice that only about 5.2% of you that are actually watching this video right now are subscribed to the channel. So if you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button. It really does make a world of difference. And smash that like button while you're at it, so that this video can get to the right sets of eyes. The Toronto Raptors and the Philadelphia 76ers finished their season series against each other, with the series going 3-1 in favor of the Toronto Raptors. And although this is impressive for the Raptors, especially considering that they were underestimated all season, especially prior to the season, And we will get to that. This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to why the 76ers should fear the team north of the border. And although the Sixers may boast the dynamic superstar 1-2 punch in Joel Embiid and James Harden, of course, we also got Tyrese Maxey, who's also an up-and-coming star. But when you really look at the Sixers team as a whole, that's pretty much where the hot list ends for this team. And on the flip side, you look at these Raptors, a masterfully architected, undoubtedly deliberate, and extremely well-balanced mix of youth and of course invaluable championship experience on its roster. It's no secret that the Raptors are freakishly long across the board. And these are a combination of players who many of which range between 6'7" to 6'9" in height, coupled with ridiculous 7-foot plus wingspans. And to put this ridiculous length of Toronto's in perspective, if some of the monster lineups that Nick Nurse has been featuring were to join hands, then they would basically cover the whole perimeter. And taking factors such as these into consideration, it's no wonder that the Raptors are second in the league in points off turnovers. And not to mention they also finished top 5 in the league in transition scoring. And despite the Raptors having one of the worst half-court offenses from any contending team, the way the team has been able to offset this has been by pulling down an insane 32.5% of available offensive boards. And this is good for second in the league behind Ja Morant and the Memphis Grizzlies, who are of course stacked at the front court position. Now when you compare these two teams statistically, the differences are actually quite minute, as you can see here, and I'll leave a chart for you guys if you really want to dig into the stats here. And the Raptors are the only team in the league to have all 5 of its starters average at least 15 points per game or more. And with significant contributions off the bench from key cogs Chris Boucher, Precious Achiuwa, and Tad Young, the team's rotation became formidable in the second half of the season. And not to mention the team as a whole, the rotation as a whole, has developed great chemistry, and each man seems to know his role, and more importantly, seems to have accepted it, wholeheartedly at that, leading to unselfish, team-oriented basketball that doesn't rely on any one or two players like many other teams in the league to get the job done on offense or on defense. And speaking of defense, the switchability that the Raptors possess is bound to hurt none other than James Harden the most, as no matter who switches onto him as he tries to run pick and rolls, which would typically allow him to be able to cause favorable mismatches against other teams' defenders, and that would let him go to work in his typical James Harden fashion, driving to the rim for a layup or a dunk, pulling up for a long or mid-range jumper, or of course drawing a foul while attempting any of the aforementioned feats. And the refs of course don't mind blowing their whistle for James Harden, especially if it's going to be against Toronto, I'll tell you that much. But let's not even go there. And continuing on about Harden will have to find a new gear if he's going to make the impact he's quite frankly being paid to make, offensively at least for the Sixers. His 3-point shooting will have to be at its best in the postseason, in a season where he has shot long-range shots at a career worst clip. And to put the cherry on top of the negatives in the Beard's game this season, he seems a half step slower, with less burst and explosiveness than we're typically used to seeing from him, which certainly won't help him against an aforementioned, extremely effective, highly switchable Toronto defense. And Spicy P, who has undoubtedly evolved his game to new heights this season, he presents a huge challenge for Philly, evidently of course because of his performances in the regular season. But if we really look at it, Embiid is going to have to guard Pascal at the perimeter, which means Philly is going to have its best rim protector out in the perimeter and not in the paint, allowing Toronto's players to attack a rim without its main protector there, to put things very simply. And when we look at everything that we know so far about the Raptors, these stats, and thanks to the score for providing them, show how the Raptors have actually put this team's balance that I was just speaking of on full display against the Sixers in the 4 games they played against them this season. The Raptors attempted 10 more field goals than the Sixers, which comes as no shock of course given the amount of second chance points they generate, courtesy of being one of the league's top 2 offensive rebounding teams of course. And not to mention Toronto was also excellent at protecting the rock, turning over the ball an average of 5 fewer times than their Sixers per contest. They had 29 more offensive rebounds than the Sixers over these 4 games, which of course resulted in more points and field goal attempts as mentioned before. And this is what really keys that balance in, as I was speaking of earlier. With the absence of Matisse Thybulle from its away games this series, the 76ers will sorely miss their best wing defender in one of the toughest buildings to play in the whole league. Now with all this being said, Stats are just stats at the end of the day, and despite what the regular season story may tell, there's no doubt that playoff basketball is basically the start of a brand new season, and as many would call it, the real season. The kind of season that core players of this Raptors team are not only familiar with, but have thrived in. And if there's one thing that's certain about this upcoming slugfest of a series, it's that no matter what the narrative or predictions may state prior to these games being played, there are too many factors to take into account, which can ultimately only be deciphered on the court. And given the fact that the Raptors were projected to be a play-in team at best this season by many in the league, and seeing where they've propelled themselves to now, it's clear that betting against this Toronto Raptors team is something that many in the basketball world right now seem to be thinking twice about.
Making it look easy here. He's got Embiid. He looks at him, give a couple stutter steps right over his head. Doing this just calmly murdering the Sixers here.
A lot of people didn't even have this Raptors team in the playoffs, nowhere near the playoffs. ESPN ranked the Raptors 20th overall on their power rankings going into the season.
Or like my standing predictions, which I had starting the season, where I had the Raptors finishing 5th. I was just a little bit surprised by a lot of these experts when they said the Raptors were a draft team, or a lottery team, I should say, and they should blow it up because we had drafted Scotty Barnes.
Yo, son, yo. Yo, we in the playoffs.
For a little bit later, Alvin. Here's Siakam. Pascal. Back again. Spins back. Finishes. 16. Loses it. Siakam lead past Scotty. Here's Barnes. Down. Scotty. Guarded by Harris. He'll fire the three, and it's good. And maybe it's one of those nights when that shot doesn't go. Here's Achua quickly into the front court. And a transition three from Precious Achua. Because you had that down. That young. Raptors break pressure. Take care of the ball. Thaddeus Young. In his hit. Watanabe and Benton comes in. Here he is pushing it quickly into the front court, down the lane, finger roll. Oh, George Gervin.
You got to be able to help your teammate, but also see your man. Do not lose your man.
Van Vliet back out on the floor. Oh, gee, with a power move over top. Jimmy.
Shot goes up, get a body on Jimmy Butler because, again, you know what his mind is.
Boucher. 3 seasons, in fact. Here's Malachi, the three. Flynn knocks it down from Flynn. OG